This is your reality check.
Hi everyone, and welcome to The Reality Check, a Canadian show that explores a wide range of controversies and curiosities using science and critical thinking. I am your host, Darren McKee, and with me, as usual, is Adam Gardner.
What's up, Cuboids?
We have a great show for you today. I'm going to give you a little book review of Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity Is Nearer. But first, Adam, why don't they just turn those office buildings into housing?
Great question, one I hear all the time. Why don't we convert the unused office space in Ottawa to housing, right? This is something I hear all the time. Heard it often at first during the pandemic. So many people migrated to remote work. Some migrated back. Some didn't. But I think for a while, there was this thought process of like, we'll just never go back. This is great. We'll just do this forever. So much to say, there's a push to convert office buildings into housing. The Budget 2024 and Canada's Housing Plan includes the intention to build more affordable homes on public lands, which includes undeveloped lands as well as things like empty office towers or low-rise buildings. So this is hardly a new idea, and it's one I hear quite frequently uttered by Canadians and others around the world as the move to remote work for some is occurring everywhere. This is a worldwide phenomenon. It's not an Ottawa phenomenon. So let's think about the question logically. Can you convert office space to housing? Sure. Are there challenges? Absolutely. And so I wondered what the feasibility of doing this kind of thing is. So in today's segment, we're going to be looking at a number of different factors that can affect how easily or how difficult it might be to be able to do this kind of conversion. I've lived in and been in many apartments. I'm in one right now.
Some of my best friends are apartments.
Yeah. So I've worked in many office buildings and many different kinds of buildings throughout the years. These kind of buildings aren't interchangeable. So what an apartment building looks like, if you think about it, just think of an apartment building or look around while you're walking around or driving. They're long, narrow buildings. There's a corridor through the middle. And then usually there's kind of apartments on either side of that single corridor. Inside the apartments themselves, there are windows in the main living area as well as in the bedroom. So an apartment is usually longer along the hall or like along the wall that's facing the windows.
With a lot of bathrooms.
A lot of bathrooms, yeah. So sometimes bathrooms on the window side, sometimes not. It depends. Sometimes it's nice to have a window to open, So you have plumbing in each unit leading to the kitchen and bathrooms of each apartment, right? So sometimes that's made so that the wall of the kitchen shares maybe the bathroom with the one next, but it's kind of dispersed all over the floor. What does an office building look like? Well, the floors are usually more square than rectangular. You have a middle of the floor where most of the plumbing comes in, or some single spot where the plumbing comes in. So your bathrooms and kitchens are usually close to each other. There's vast open areas or even individual closed offices, but you don't have like a sink in everybody's office or anything like that. Some offices and work areas are along windows, which are often like the windows are continuous. There won't be big breaks in them along some big wall. You don't really have any plumbing everywhere in these areas, except maybe some sort of sprinkler system that runs along the ceiling or something like that. So if you want to do the opposite, which is convert living space to office space, you can probably make that work. There'll probably be more load-bearing walls than you want to deal with. Maybe you want more open space, but you see things like that. You'll see a restaurant that's built out of an old house or something like that. It might be a little awkward shape, but it works. If you need to convert office space to living space, it's not so easy, and there's some unique challenges there. It's been done. Surely it's been done. So I can think of one particular building in Ottawa that did that. For those who live near here, corner of Rideau and King Edward, they basically turned it into student housing. I've not been inside. And this might not be the same as normal apartments because it's student housing, so they may just have very specific layouts that are conducive to that. I know someone who used to live in this building, which was like a converted warehouse or factory that had been converted into apartments. And I thought that was kind of cool. And I was looking around, how does this work? How do they do this? But basically it was a studio apartment, which is ideally suited for this kind of thing. So one big open space. The only separate room was like a bathroom. There might have been a closet or something somewhere. High ceilings, open space. Windows were far from sort of the front door to get into the unit. You had your kitchen, living space, and bed all sort of in one big area. Very narrow, long in the opposite way of a normal apartment. So not along the window, but long with like the window at the end, if that makes sense. So it's maybe not the most effective use of space, but it worked for this kind of unit. And you wouldn't have been able to put like private 1 or 2 bedroom units in this kind of space. Or if you would, you'd have been much more limited in what you're doing.
Or just might have been cost prohibitive, right?
Yeah, and cost is a factor. So this was in Brooklyn near New York City. So the rent could be really high and they could afford to charge really high for a studio apartment. You probably wouldn't be able to get away with charging whatever they were charging around here. This was probably an easier conversion than something like an office building too, because this was like maybe 1 or 2 floors. So the ceilings might be lower in an office building than you'd have in a setup like this, which if the ceilings are too low, then less natural light comes in if you've got sort of a longer unit, something like that. And you have challenges with the plumbing for sure. So you need to run a lot more pipes in general. The capacity of the office building won't be the same as an apartment. So there's a high capacity of people in an office building and they'll use the bathroom throughout the day. They'll use some sinks, water fountains, stuff like that. But they're not showering, running a dishwasher, laundry machines, baths, things like that. It's not the same as when people live in a place. The uses aren't really comparable. So it's really a challenge getting those utilities spread around to the right places on those floors, and it's also a challenge basically having the capacity work. So it's hard to make use of that space. It's easy to put apartments around the windows, but what do you do with all that windowless space at the center of these buildings? You rather have awkward shaped apartments, maybe some common areas without windows, but that's not really appealing. People don't really want to have an apartment where you come in and it's like, okay, I've got my main living room where I don't see the light of day. That's not really, like, it's not normal, right? So you generally always have a window in, or at least natural light that is visible from your bedrooms, your kitchen, your dining room, your living room. Even if it's not directly in a window, the light should shine in, right? And also, in an office, you don't open the windows generally. Maybe in some older buildings you do, but usually offices built after sort of 1960s and stuff like that, you're not going to open your windows. You're not going to have balconies and things like that. So if you want anything that's a little more standard, again, you can do it. It's more work. It's expensive. So it's doable. Costs aren't trivial. You aren't just sort of framing and drywalling in some big open floor plan and then it's fine and you have different rooms and this is going to be an apartment and you're good to go. So one thing that motivated me to write this segment, I saw a thread on Twitter by a woman who converted office space in New York to luxury apartments, so New York City. And again, so this is New York, so luxury apartments can be sold for very high prices there that you wouldn't be able to do the same thing in other markets, right? Your costs and your losses aren't really the same. Basically, she said no 2 apartments were alike because of the challenges of converting the space, which dated back to like the 50s. So there were girders everywhere and they were tough to work around, including working new plumbing around it. And I think this is where, like, when you're building an apartment building, you have your construction teams come in, you have the exact same plans for every single unit. You get a lot of savings there. I built a house it was maybe 5-6 years ago, and there was like one minor change to our kitchen because there was like a duct that came through where it wasn't there before. And it was just like, to me, it was behind a cabinet and it didn't matter. And our kitchen people were like, oh, okay, yeah, it's going to be like 8 to 12 weeks to like redo the plans and redo everything because of this duct that changed. So you imagine that like,
jeez.
Usually you have a builder that's just like, okay, we're going to build these bunch of semi-detached and there's really only 4 different models. So you kind of have these specific floor plans and your teams go in and they do the exact same thing and the architect signed off on the same thing and everything. So when you start having these little intricacies and differences in all these spaces, the costs go up. Everything gets more complicated and it's not a ton of fun. Another consideration is zoning. So this is certainly a surmountable problem, but you kind of need the city to be on board with it. So if there was something, if they wanted to do something like that in Ottawa, if the federal government's pushing for it, probably get the mayor to say it's okay. And of course, structural issues might exist, right? You can't always move a wall if it's load bearing, might be a problem there. So sunlight's an issue. It kind of comes back to the window issue I said. But also proper airflow is a concern. So you can't necessarily just put up walls because the existing HVAC system is sort of made to be unobstructed in certain cases, or it's going to be made with what's there. So if you're changing the whole layout of the building, it's fine. You have to kind of change the whole HVAC system. Is there one centralized furnace, or what are you doing? Complicated, just more things to think about. And privacy can be an issue, right? How are you separating your units? It's just wood and drywall. So a nice apartment building will usually have like a concrete wall separating the units, really cuts down on the noise. But that's like part of the structure of the building. Like they pour that when the building goes up. So might be a little more complicated or again expensive to do that after the fact.
Just adding concrete floor by floor in walls. Well, it seems ridiculous.
Yeah, and then like if the separation of apartments from floor to floor doesn't really line up, well, Can I necessarily just pour a full sort of firewall or whatever they call it of concrete here and it's only supported by like a wood floor.
Oh, it sounds like chaos.
It's complicated. Parking may or may not be an issue, right? So if an office building already has a ton of parking for employees, that may not be a big problem. But maybe they're not as close to the building as you'd like, or who knows how it's laid out. And affordability can be an issue, kind of as I mentioned. While something like a luxury apartment in New York would be doable, because you sort of like the costs don't really factor as much when you're selling things for millions of dollars. So you'd get that back in that kind of market. But other things, some cities have a downtown core that can have very expensive housing there, but not all cities necessarily do. So if you're looking to make affordable housing, like many places, many cities are trying to do, well, it can't really be affordable unless you're taking a loss on the construction part of it. So one article I read about such a conversion in Australia said that the conversion for mid-rise buildings between 4 and 10 stories is common, but it's less common for high-rise office buildings, which is usually what we're talking about when we look at things like big downtown areas with large office buildings that are being converted. Interestingly, this Australian article from summer 2023 stated that the pandemic effect on workplaces might not linger. So very insightful. Good prediction. I kind of felt in 2022 that things were mostly back to normal, that where people were working was kind of where they were going to stay. But I think for a lot of people who are either remote, got called back in or things like that. So that state has changed since then and continues to always sort of be reinvestigated. So you can never really be sure. Can we convert office space to apartments? Yes. Will it be easy or at all affordable? Well, not really. There are many challenges with adapting these spaces, which can vary greatly from one building to another. Remains to be seen what's going to be happening in your city.
Well, thanks, Adam. And yeah, I've heard similar things over the years when people are like, well, can't we just do this to that, right? Yeah. And when people say this, good intentions, it seems like this sort of problem is the same sized hole, so to speak, as this size solution, but they're not at all the same thing. And these large buildings are not necessarily built to be, as you said, apartments for numerous reasons. And there would have to be a certain type of building or a certain type of like financial incentive where either like it's owned in a certain way or it's leased in a certain way or someone's willing to do the retrofit, whatever it might be, that makes it seem viable. Or, there's some people like, yes, I'd like a whole floor for myself. And you have some weird thing where there's,
sure.
Some really rich people, but most cities don't have the capacity for that, especially I own the whole floor of the second floor of a building that's not that great.
Yeah. Like if I wanted to have like a massive apartment with a pool and a ballroom, like things like that, then I'm like, okay, great, because it's big open space. But if you just want like a series of normal 1 to 3 bedroom apartments that kind of normal-ish people can live in for an affordable price.
What if you want an apartment with, say, 20 cubicles? It's like, sir, you're in luck. You got like 1 bedroom and 20 cubicles. Like, what are you doing in your apartment?
Excel
I have
spreadsheets.
Yeah, I have monkeys at typewriters. Look, my life is my business.
I bet those monkeys would have appreciated an office seat.
This is the best of times. This is the blurst of times.
I think at one point it's like you can tear down the building and build a new one for a better cost than what you're doing with a retrofit. Obviously, that itself is very expensive.
Or practically speaking, perhaps the current person who's leasing doesn't renew it, and then a different building's built somewhere else. Well, the owner of that building just loses out. That seems more practical than actually tearing it down. And you know what I mean? Because who's paying for that? It seems like the speed to retrofit office building into residential living quarters is not keeping pace with certain technological trends. And I think Ray Kurzweil might agree with that. And he has a new book, The Singularity Is Nearer. And I'm going to talk to you about it today. Well, what I thought about it anyway. Concisely, this was an unfortunate disappointment. The Singularity Is Nearer, which is an accurate but to me almost parody title that he chose for his own book by Ray Kurzweil, is a follow-up to his 2005 book, The Singularity Is Nearer. It's been almost 20 years and things are nearer in time, so that makes sense. Yeah. But the book Singularity Is Nearer, the recent one, fails to provide many novel ideas and often relies upon superficial or misleading treatment of many topics. Now, if one has never been exposed to Kurzweil's ideas, the book is likely quite interesting because some people I know who read it like, wow, I've never heard of this before. I'm like, oh, well, that is great. Okay, fair enough. Alternatively, if one already has been exposed to some of his ideas, then the book seems largely unnecessary. I assume it was kind of like a legacy play, or to remind people how he correctly was anticipating many of the key developments currently in progress. And I say that because, like, why do books exist, right? There are different reasons, marketing reasons, personal reasons, these sorts of things, but one wonders why this book exists at this time. And I think it's mostly for that. It's not that he is providing something truly novel. That said, not everyone agrees with everyone on Earth, and a lot of people don't, well, most people don't agree with each other. That's in a numbers game. And so if you can try to get more people to agree with what you're saying, you need to keep putting out new material. That's also how the world works. You can't just release the thing from many years ago, even if it's largely the same. This isn't quite largely the same, although it is very similar thematically.
I do find The Singularity Is Nearer aged very well. I read it somewhat recently, and I didn't even realize it was as old a book as it was. So
yes, it is more detailed, more dense, well, therefore less accessible, while this one is intended to be more accessible. So Kurzweil was indeed interacting with key luminaries throughout the history of the AI space. He was inventing technologies or at the table for many important AI developments over the past many decades. And sometimes I think he would stick that in as an aside for credibility purposes, like, oh, I was at that meeting. And that's fine. Other times he'd say, this person is my advisor, which is clearly an indication of a deeper relationship where someone might have learned something and gained some insights. That said, other times, like, well, why don't you just really elaborate on that? Like, what happened at that meeting? These sorts of things. That would have been nice. So that's the overview. I mean, I haven't really told you what the book's about, but just in case, Ray Kurzweil thinks that current technological trends, sort of like Moore's Law, where computational power is going to get increasingly more and more powerful, is going to continue, and it will reach human level in approximately 2029. And then we will have the singularity in the mid-2040s. And that is loosely when things are happening so fast, change is happening so fast, we can't really understand it or anticipate it. It is about when we merge with AI. So you get a bit of how AI works, what's going to happen in the near future, how he thinks we're going to merge with AI. This is sort of partially uploading our brains or just becoming more technologically sophisticated. But there are, chapters on consciousness. There's about economics and like the future of work, that sort of thing. And there's a little bit on peril near the end. So it is a broad book and it covers many different topics. I'm also really, I won't say biased, but in a peculiar sort here where I happen to read 30 or 40 AI books for writing of my book. And so it's just a very familiar space to me, right? So a little overview there. And now my gripes about the book. So there was this chapter on consciousness, and I thought the entire chapter was problematic because Kurzweil embraces pan-proto-psychism, and neglects to discuss key reasons why many people strongly disagree with it. Now, one doesn't always have to mention Daniel Dennett, who's a favorite of mine, but if you're going to discuss Chalmers so much, it seems kind of appropriate. So loosely, pan-proto-psychism in this sense is seeing consciousness as a type of matter that pervades the universe. So consciousness becomes like a fundamental constituent of the universe. Kurzweil does repeatedly say some of these questions about consciousness can't be solved scientifically, and there's an open question here. And so he does hedge a little bit, but he doesn't say, oh, many people disagree with this entirely. Or if we follow the scientific method, there are other reasons to think this doesn't make sense at all, and these sorts of things, which is a bit disappointing. He also was talking about how, which is interesting as a thought experiment, could there be a different version of you, right? If you could replicate part of your brain at the higher level pattern stage in sort of silicon, right? In chips, in the cloud, maybe something like that. Could there be another version of you, so to speak, you too, which could then have thoughts and feelings and experiences, which is fine. I tend to agree with that. It is also interesting if one has never considered such a thing. Then, because of this, his interpretation of pan-proto-psychism, he indicated that a future you might get to experience the subjective experience of distinct copies of you. Because, magic? It's not really explained. To me, this makes no sense whatsoever. This is, again, a different physical entity than you. It could be, you can imagine, someone has some sort of copying machine, a magical copying machine. You step into it, like a duplicator, and another you pops out. There's no good reason to think those two entities are going to swap psychic energy, for lack of a better phrase.
Yeah.
And it was just very disappointing because this is supposed to be a book about sciencey ideas, AI. Here's some trends. Here's tons of data about different trends in computational speed, chip development, all these sorts of things. And then you get, in my opinion, a bit of nonsense about consciousness, or at least very ungrounded stuff that didn't need to be in here. This is also perhaps my tainted belief now that if something seems really weird, you don't need to put it in a book because it undermines your credibility.
Yep.
Other times you get points for, here's a weird idea. Look, isn't it fun to think about?
Sometimes, if it's a topic that's been done to death, your weird thing can separate you from something similar. But I didn't feel that was the strength of this book.
No, I think, again, it could have been a small, by the way, these people think this and these people think that. Mm-hmm. It's very undecided. Mm-hmm. My personal belief is this. Yep. It was a lot more of this is my personal belief, not other people think this is bonkers for these reasons. Gripe number 2, he incorrectly defines marginal cost as cost. This is unfortunate. There's a whole chapter on economic stuff and work, and the marginal cost is the cost of one more unit of producing some good, not the total cost that goes into producing that good. I don't know why this happened. I mean, a lot of people reviewed this book, internally, right? He had help, assistants, editors, and these sorts of things. On the next couple pages, he seems to use a more correct understanding of what a marginal cost is. But for people who don't know economics, it's not going to help them to define marginal cost inaccurately the first time they come across it. And he overtly says, this is marginal cost. Like, no, it's not, dude. I mean, it's close, but it's not. Why mislead people? So that seems just weird. And again, if you're looking for reasons to give him less trust, well, that's going to add up there, right? Another one is that while Kurzweil has had many successful predictions, he's also been wrong. A more honest approach would be to show some sort of table which he got right and which he got wrong. Mm-hmm. Now, that's a very simple approach. Ideally, you'd have some sort of, gradient, which shows how difficult the prediction was to make or the likelihood of it coming true in general at the time, which makes it exceptionally complicated. But broadly speaking, I think people could evaluate for themselves if there was an appendix. It's like, oh, I think someone's going to be elected president. You're like, well, that's a bad prediction. That's not what he said. I'm just trying to pick something like ridiculous and easy. Like, you don't get any points for that. So just more, again, some cherry picking there, right? Kurzweil has made some accurate predictions, but some ones that were not quite accurate at all. Gripe number 4. Kurzweil thinks we will merge with AI, but provides little discussion of the dramatic societal upheaval this would cause and how many will end up losers in this space. At least that's my belief. To add some clarity, it's not that Kurzweil never acknowledges a downside or something that I'm mentioning he should mention. It's more that it might happen briefly in a sentence or in a short paragraph. And I want a more complex elaboration of some of the key ideas here versus just kind of lip service. There's this thing I think is probably good, and then these bad things could happen, but they probably won't. You're like, well, maybe. So with this merging with AI, he doesn't really discuss the timeline for when this will occur compared to when AI systems themselves will be so advanced they surpass humans. It seems likely that these AI systems will far surpass humans before any merging takes place. In fact, you'll use these very smart AI systems to help us figure out how to do this. But as we know, humans, we're made of meat, and it takes a long time to figure out how to put the little nanobots in our bloodstream or different electric systems near our neurons to communicate information, to relay this, to do that. So when you really think about the practical, quick turnaround of humans merging with systems in a digital manner, that seems like it's going to take a long time to get right. Let alone like regulatory issues and societal concerns and backlash here and secret experiments, who knows where, like all these sorts of things. So the idea that this might happen on a large scale quickly, meaning even the next couple decades, seems low to me when AI is taking off like a rocket, and even Kurzweil thinks so. So it's fine to say we merge with AI, but it also seems like the AI is now very, very, very powerful and humans are kind of left in the dust.
Yeah, he seems to be very optimistic, which is kind of fine. But you need to tell that story a little better. If he's got a really good reason to be optimistic, explain to me why. Instead of just saying like, well, people have been pessimistic in the past and they were wrong, and I think it's going to be fine, and it's going to be good, and look at all the great things we can do. Like, but what about like all the different ways this can go wrong, aside from the one way you're seeing that it could go right? So that's obviously a bit concerning.
Perfect segue into my last gripe. So I can sympathize with wanting to reach a broader audience, as Kurzweil's doing here, but given his prominence, and that so many people helped him with the book, it would have been very helpful for him to provide more details on how all these supposedly positive technological developments will end up mostly positive. So, as Adam said, it was optimistic. I know other friends who read it, they also thought, oh, it's nice, the tone was optimistic. He's so optimistic. Like, yes, but does he have reasons? Yeah. Well, again, there's pros and cons to not providing reasons. In this case, it'd be very useful for him to provide good reasons, because I would like to be more optimistic. Just give me some good reasons. Yep. Like, as I've said, it's important to have hope, and I think there's reasons for hope, but some of what he says just sounds like it'd be great if it happens, but it's just like flipping a coin, wishful thinking. So he'll say something like, we need strong international norms for good things. Yeah. He doesn't say for good things, of course. But like, well, that's not enough, right? Or, well, we need international laws about this. Or, well, there are some safety concerns, but I think we'll figure those out. You're like, well, maybe, but how? Why?
Yeah, if we work really hard.
Well, like he is so prominent. If he has good reasons, he could literally alter the course of the world itself and make it safer, which would be amazing. Mm-hmm. And yet, since he doesn't, that's even more concerning because then you think, well, do you just not have any because no one has any? Did you, again, try to make such a, more popularly accessible book? Thought, well, I'm not going to get into details here. But that said, it's not like I've heard him expound in detail elsewhere in more technical papers or somewhere else, even in a long, obscure Twitter thread. Here's all the reasons why things are going to be working out and be safe and just fine. Mm-hmm. So that is not reassuring.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, he works in this space. He's a pioneer in this space. He's doing great things. And the people who are doing that work need to be at least a little concerned that they're getting it right.
Right. I mean, there is a thing where Geoffrey Hinton left Google because he wanted to speak out about the dangers of AI. Mm-hmm. Ray Kurzweil still works for Google. Mm-hmm. So there is a reasonable interpretation where he can't come out being overtly critical of the very models that his company is developing. That doesn't really look good either.
Yeah, there's a conflict of interest if that's it, right? I don't think he's being dishonest, but yeah, you're not getting the full picture if you don't have those concerns. And it's kind of okay sometimes to just read that different perspective, but for someone who's sort of like a pioneer in this space, I would hope for something a little more complete. Well,
two things, right? To further that, he was on Time's 100 people in AI, top 100 people in AI. Mm-hmm. And for many people out there, this might be the only AI book they read. Yeah. They're not going to read 4 and like, oh, well, this one mentions that and this one, people don't have the time for that. So that's when I'm, even more desirous of some fantasy land. Well, they just are more broad and comprehensive while at the same time somehow being accessible.
Yeah, like for me to read this, I'm like, okay, well, he was optimistic, but like, it's not like I'm completely blind to the more, I don't want to say more pessimistic or more realistic or the different views of the risks, right?
Well, yes, given that, you listen to me blather on all the time and we did talk to Joshua Bengio and there's this book called Uncontrollable, which I think people should check out on Amazon.
Great book.
Uh-huh. So that's the book review. Clearly, I'm saying that maybe it's not in your best interest. That's it. If you read this and you liked it, please write in. I'd be curious to hear what we disagree with. And thanks for joining us once again. Adam explored why office buildings won't easily make good residential housing, even small apartments. And I talked to you about Ray Kurzweil's The Singularity Is Nearer. Until next time, think better to act better.
Peace out, cuboids.
For show notes or to discuss this episode, visit our Facebook page and website at trcpodcast.com. For general inquiries or to send a topic or parody suggestion, email info@trcpodcast.com. Help support the show by leaving a review on iTunes and liking us on Facebook. Follow us on Twitter @TRC_podcast.